Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be led in the singing of O Canada by Ms. Defoe, our acting city clerk, and followed by a moment of silent reflection. Ms. Defoe, over to you. Thank you.
System down. She doesn't normally sing it.
Whenever you're ready, Madam Clerk.
Through your worship, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest, and if so, please state the general nature thereof.
Seeing none.
Moving on to item 3, adoption of the minutes, and there is a motion that the minutes of the regular meeting of council dated October 28th be adopted as printed.
Moved by Councillor Ritzma, seconded by Councillor Henderson. Discussion. Seeing none. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Item 4 is adoption of the addenda to the agenda, and on your desk is an addenda to this evening's meeting. The purpose of the addenda is to add items 7.5 and 11.13, and there is a motion that the addenda, the regular agenda of council, be added as printed.
Moved by Councillor Burback and seconded by Councillor Ingram. The addenda be adopted. Discussion. Not all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Item 5 is report of the Committee of the Whole in camera session, and item 5.1 from the October 28th session. There is a matter relating to agreement of purchase and sale, and there is a motion that council agrees to convey and transfer the subject properties to the respective property owners as listed on your agenda.
Moved by Councillor Ingram, seconded by Councillor Vasilakos. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Item 5.2 is from the October 28th session. It's regarding an application to the Energy and Environment Committee. And there is a motion that Sammy Orr be appointed as the youth representative for the Energy and Environment Committee for a 1-year term to September 30th, 2020, or until a successor is appointed.
Moved by Councillor Henderson, seconded by Councillor Gaffney. Discussion. If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. Congratulations, Sammy. Thanks for being in attendance.
Yeah, good for
And item
you.
5.3, also from the October 28th session, is an appointment to the Huron-Perth Health Unit Board. And there is a motion that Councillor Henderson and Councillor Vasilakos be appointed as council representatives to the Huron-Perth Health Unit Board until November 14th, 2022.
Moved by Councillor Burback, seconded by Councillor Ritzma. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Item 5.4, just part of this evening's meeting, an in-camera session was held to discuss a matter relating to personal matters about identifiable individuals and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege. And at the in-camera session, direction was given on both items.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 6, hearings of deputations and presentations. Item 6.1 is a public meeting, and there is a motion that the council meeting adjourn to a public meeting under the Planning Act to hear draft plan of subdivision 31T19-001 and zone change application Z09-19, and to reconvene at the conclusion of the public meeting.
Moved by Councillor Sebin and seconded by Councillor Ingram that we adjourn for the purposes of conducting a public meeting and reconvene following. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. I'll call the public meeting to order, and the purpose of this meeting is to give council and the public an opportunity to hear all interested persons with respect to draft plan of subdivision 31T19-001 and zone change application Z09-19. The application affects the property with the municipal address of 236 Britannia Street in the city of Stratford. The order of procedure for this meeting is as follows. Staff will present the application, then the applicant or their agent will then make a presentation. Council may ask questions for the purposes of clarifying the application, but are cautioned not to make comments nor take a position on the application at this public meeting. The public will be asked for their comments, presentations, and any questions they may have. The public is advised that if a person has not provided council with oral submissions at a public meeting or written submissions before a bylaw is adopted or a decision is made, the local planning appeal tribunal has the power to dismiss an appeal. The public is also advised that comments expressed and written material presented are a matter of public record for full disclosure. Are there any questions as to the order of procedure with regard to this meeting? Seeing none, we'll now proceed with the meeting, and I'd invite forward staff planner Rachel Bossy to make the presentation. Rachel.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the subject lands are known as 236 Britannia Street and are located on the north side of Britannia Street between Churchill Circle and Briar Hill Drive. The lands are approximately 7.71 hectares in size and are currently vacant and are surrounded by single detached dwellings, the Rotary Complex, and an apartment dwelling. These lands are known as the former fairground lands, and in 2011, Council declared these lands as surplus. To facilitate the sale of these lands for residential uses, an official plan amendment was approved in 2016. The subject lands were sold to the owner in 2018, and now they are initiating the process to develop the lands. So the draft plan of subdivision.
Through you, Your Worship, we are experiencing some technical difficulties with the PowerPoint
Oh,
presentation.
okay.
So I'll try to explain everything the best I can. So the draft plan of subdivision is proposed to accommodate 151 dwelling units in the form of single detached dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, street townhouse dwellings, and townhouse dwellings. The lands are proposed to contain a stormwater management block and are to be served by two local roads, Street A, which will be off of Britannia Street, and Street B that will connect to the Rotary Complex lands. Pedestrian connections are proposed to connect the development to Coriando and Waddell Street on the east and to Briar Hill Drive on the west through two walkway blocks. The draft plan does not include a park block. The park intended to serve the subdivision and surrounding lands is Countryside Park to the west of the Rotary Complex. The rezoning application is proposing to change the zoning on the subject lands from an institutional/future residential special zone to a residential second density zone, which was shown on yellow in the zoning plan. These lands are proposed to be developed as single detached and semi-detached dwellings, and special provisions for the single and semi-detached dwellings were requested for the front yard setback, exterior side yard setback, interior side yard setback, lot coverage, and height. The lands are also proposed to be zoned a residential fourth density special provisions zone that was shown in orange on the zoning plan. And the blocks fronting onto Street A are proposed to be developed as street townhouse blocks, and the multi-block is proposed to be developed as townhouse dwellings. Special provisions for the townhouse dwellings were requested for the lot depth, front yard setback, exterior side yard setback, interior side yard setback, rear yard setback, lot coverage, and height. And special provisions were requested for the street townhouse dwellings for the front yard setback, exterior side yard setback, interior side yard setback, lot coverage, and height. And the lands are also proposed to be zoned a park that was shown in green on the zoning plan, and that's intended to be used for the stormwater management plan. So the lands are designated residential area / special policy 16 in the official plan. And lands within the special policy area 16 are to have a minimum net density of 25 units per hectare, that's 10 units per acre. And the special policy outlines that future buildings shall have a form, massing, and appearance that is consistent with the character of adjacent buildings. And future development shall provide a public road access to the City of Stratford Rotary Complex. So the subject lands are currently zoned institutional / future residential / special, and that permits a trailer camp and all the other uses permitted in the institutional zone, such as an auditorium, a business office, a hospital, post-secondary school, recreation park, etc. And so through the circulation of the application to abutting property owners, at the time that the report was completed, staff had received 7 responses, 6 letters, and 1 petition with signatures from 15 different properties. The responses included comments on green space, concerns about special provisions requested in the R2 bracket 2 and R4 bracket 2 zones, the subdivision layout, lot sizes, fencing, grading, infrastructure, utilities, and traffic. And a summary of the public comments received have been included within the public meeting report. And the public comments received will be addressed by staff in a future planning report, and 2 additional responses were received today, and so those will be reviewed by staff and they will be addressed in a future planning and heritage report. And so through the circulation to commenting agencies, the main concern comment received from engineering was in regards to the preliminary servicing report. And the comment was related to that the report does not demonstrate that the land is able to be serviced by gravity and that no pumping station is required. So this is a comment that must be addressed prior to preparing the draft plan conditions, as the servicing, the plans and the conditions and the studies will need to reflect the servicing method that will be implemented on site. And there were no other issues raised by other commenting agencies. And so the applicant has received a copy of the comments received, and they have noted that they will be working through them. So if you had any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Ms. Bossy at this time? From members of council. Councillor Seven.
I just had a question about the requirement that they're planning on one sidewalk or one sidewalk on I'm just wondering, it's just a funny layout. I wish there were a picture. I'm just wondering if we know where the sidewalk will be.
Through your worship, we have not determined where the sidewalk will be. I know there's been some internal discussions, but it has not been finalized. That's something that we'll lay out through the draft plan conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burback.
Somewhat related to that, I'm wondering if there's a plan to put in a bike lanes through this subdivision.
Through your worship, the road is proposed to be a local road that will have a design width of 20 meters. I would have to double check with engineering if they were planning on including bike lanes within that.
Councillor Ingram.
Just in relation to some of the comments regarding the height of the potential proposed buildings, what is the height of the existing apartment building that the City of Stratford just built?
Through your worship, I would have to double check that. But I believe I think it's a 3-story. So I would have to confirm the height of that, but I believe it's definitely under 15 meters. I just can't remember the exact.
Thank you.
Right.
Any other questions from members of council? All right. At this time, I'll invite forward the applicant's representative, Christine Barsdale from GSP Group. Ms. Bossy, if you want to come sit up here, you can. Great.
Thank you.
You're in charge.
Good evening, Mayor Matheson and members of council. My name is Kristen Barrisdale from GSP Group, and we are the agents acting on behalf of the current property owner. Unfortunately, I did prepare a presentation to walk through tonight. I understand that we can't see it, but I will be happy to provide it to Rachel after this meeting for anybody to have a look at it. It mostly contains the documentation that you've received, either as part of your public notice or as part of the staff report. There are a few graphics I wanted to touch on at the end to address some of the concerns that we've received to date with regards to grading and how the height, requests for height changes may impact or may be seen from the perimeter or around the property. So again, I will pass that information along to the planning department that can be made available to the public. So just a quick outline. I'm just going to go through a bit of background. I'll kind of walk through the draft plan of subdivision and proposed zoning as best I can without the graphics. And then we have received the circulation comments to date through discussions with city staff as well as the applicant. We've prepared some responses or some commentary to address some of the comments we've received, and we continue to work through them with city staff. So as Rachel spoke to, the lands were formerly the Agricultural Society and declared surplus in October 2011. An official plan amendment was initiated by the city in May of 2014 to provide for the future residential development. In addition, at that time, the city also undertook an assessment from a servicing perspective to confirm the servicing requirements for the property, including stormwater management and sanitary connections. The servicing concept or assessment that was done at that time was based on a concept that was prepared by the city. The draft plan that you see in front of you today is very similar to the concept that was prepared by the city in terms of street layout, density, unit makeup, and general location of where the different uses are proposed. There's obviously been some tweaking and some further refinements to that concept as we had more detailed information. The servicing assessment determined that the property could be serviced through existing sanitary and water capacity, and it also determined that an on-site stormwater management facility was required to accommodate drainage both on-site as part of the future development, as well as possibly address some of the off-site drainage issues we understand that may exist in and around the property. A public meeting was held in September 2014 to obtain feedback from residents at that point, again, based on the concept as prepared by city staff, similar to what the draft plan is that you see in front of you. The request for proposal for acquisition of the land was released in July 2017, and Bromberg Homes was selected as the successful bidder in the acquisition of the lands. We submitted a pre-submission consultation request, which was held with the city in April of 2018, and the application, it's between that time and now this time that all the technical studies and reports were put together and submitted a complete application to formalize the draft plan of subdivision and future residential neighborhood. So as Rachel discussed, it's noted on page 3 of the staff report and page 4 of the notice, I think, that all the public would receive the draft plan of subdivision. Street townhouses are proposed on the north end of the property, north of Street A, as well as on the south side of Street A. You'll also see on the south side of Street A that there's a cluster development or a multiple block that's been identified. The intent of that is to provide for future townhouse development. They just will not have street orientation. Along to the east of that cluster block, there are some semi-detached proposed dwellings, and then the balance of the subdivision will remain single-detached. There's also a stormwater management facility on the site, and as noted or required by the official plan, the road access and road layout has been designed to accommodate future access to the Rotary Complex. Rachel touched on the zoning bylaw. Again, it's page 4 in the staff report and page 5 of the notice that you would have received. The R42 is essentially anything that applies to the street townhouses or the cluster townhouses. Again, on the north side of Street A and on the south side of Street A, there's a block. The balance of the subdivision is proposed to be zoned for single detached residential uses, and then the stormwater management block is proposed to be park. I did have a table in my presentation that compares the existing bylaw regulations and some of the changes that we're requesting. I'll just walk through verbally some of the changes, but again, I will provide all this material to Rachel so that everybody can have a look. As touched on, we are asking for a 4.5 meter front yard setback and a 3 meter setback. The existing bylaw requires a minimum of 4.5 meters with 6 meter requirement along Britannia. So we're just essentially looking to formalize that to apply to the entire site. Point of clarification is the intent of that setback is not to have the house and driveway and garage at 4.5 meters. The actual bylaw details that garages have to be set back at least 6 meters from the road. So what this does is it creates a porch and a streetscape closer to the road while allowing the garage and driveway to provide for parking. We are asking for an increase in lot coverage from 40% to 50%, and we are asking for an increase in the maximum height from 10% to 12%. Now that's for the single detached residential zones. Similarly for the townhouses, we are seeking the same front yard setbacks. Again, it would just ensure that we're maintaining a consistent streetscape along all of the streets, providing for that 6-meter setback for cars and garages. We are reducing the side yard to 1.5. This would essentially provide for a 3-meter separation between townhouse blocks, which provides more than sufficient access to people's backyards. We are providing or asking for a reduced rear yard of 6 meters, an increased lot coverage from 40 to 55%, and again, a maximum height from 10 meters to 12 meters. And I am going to touch on building height. I'm going to move into now some of the comments that we've received and how hopefully some of the commentary I can provide you tonight can address some of those concerns or give you a bit more information. So we've received, I'm going to break the comments down into different components or issues or considerations that we received. As Rachel touched on, we received comments from engineering related particularly to the design of the subdivision and the servicing report. Comments from Bell Canada that indicate an easement will be required, which is typical in this type of development. Bell wants to ensure that they're providing or they have the ability to provide service and access. Canada Post provided information or comments that they would like to see a centralized mailbox. Engineering also did provide comments with regards to sidewalks. And as touched on earlier, once we get into the detailed design of the draft plan of subdivision, the applicant will be responsible for adhering to the city's typical standard with regards to cross sections, meaning how wide the road has to be, how big the boulevard has to be, and where the sidewalks have to be. As part of the public circulation comments, there was comments pertaining to green space, concerns with regards to the removal of the existing green space, questions with regards to the future owned baseball or the future of the city owned baseball fields. And then there was also a consideration to establish a park with equipment within the proposed draft plan of subdivision. As Rachel touched on, the subdivision itself, or the proposed subdivision, does not include the green space lands still owned by the city. And I think the future determination of what those lands will be used for and how they will be used will be dealt with at a later date with city staff. So to get into some of the comments or questions with regards to increased coverage, increase in heights, the reduced lot depth, as Rachel touched on, we have a special policy area that speaks to this community in particular, and we're required to achieve a density of 25 units per hectare, which is slightly higher than probably the densities that are surrounding the subdivision. And unfortunately, to achieve that, along with providing for the stormwater management facility and the future streets that are going to be on the site, you do see a product that is slightly more intense than the surrounding mature neighborhood. The one image that I wanted to present to you tonight was with regards to heights and massing. Yes, we are seeking to increase the height to 12 meters. But that's to reflect the grading on the site. Some of the lots that are on the north side of the property and the lots that back onto some of the properties on Waddell, there's a significant grade change and there's a walkout that happens as you go from street level to the rear yard. So the houses themselves will all be and function as 2-story houses. The height is required, or the change in height that we're asking is required to deal with the grading differential that happens at the rear of the properties. Because the City of Stratford zoning bylaw defines height from the base, the average base level, to the peak. So we actually have to measure our height of the entire house from the peak of the roof, which would include unused attic areas, and depending on how steep that roof is, down to the base of the development. And again, we've got some concepts in here, some cross sections and some side images to relay how that looks from a perspective if you're standing on the street or if you're standing at the rear of the house. This will be made available to city staff, and by all means, they can circulate or Rachel can do with it as she sees necessary. We did receive comments with regards to the location of the townhouse dwellings. the size of the proposed lots, privacy and fencing. The existing official plan policies, in our opinion, provide for and encourage a mix and forms of densities. Again, we're trying to achieve the density requirements also established through special policy areas. And it's our opinion that the concepts are consistent with development. These are two-story, single detached or townhouse dwellings. From the function of a streetscape, they are relatively the same from a formatting and tenure perspective as surrounding uses. Finally, there was comments with regards to traffic, concerns with an increase in traffic and noise, and then there was also comments raised or concerns raised with regards to the access provided to the Rotary Complex. Again, the special policy area requires us to provide that access, and there was some significant back and forth with the city before we even made the application to ensure that we are providing a safe access that meets minimum requirements from a development and building code perspective. So we continue to work with city staff on the comments we've received. Our intent is after this meeting to collect further comments that are received from this meeting and then kind of one by one start working through with city staff and departments to determine changes that have to happen to any of the technical reports and studies to bring that back to a package that hopefully everyone is happy with. So that's it for my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Great. Councillor Henderson?
I've got about 3. So when you were talking about future, I think it's block 67. So people entering that are going to drive down the northeast side of that building to get back there. So they're going to be behind each other. So they won't have access right to the road, is that?
Through you, Mayor, yes. So the access to that cluster townhouse development block is located on the eastern side of that block behind the semi-detached uses.
And will that be like 8 units, just like the front, or?
It'll be in blocks of 6 or 8 units, but it'll be more of a cluster development that's kind of oriented internally rather than having a presence on the street.
Okay. And when you mentioned about 1.5 for a side yard, what is our bylaw currently?
Through you, Mayor, the requirement right now is 2.5.
2.5. So if somebody puts up a fence, are you still even going to actually have room to get your lawnmower down with it that narrow?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that's my experience. Some municipalities go down to a minimum of 1 or 1.2. They usually say kind of arm span to get through. So I think 1.5 is more than sufficient space to provide for the lawnmower to get into the backyard if there is a fence.
Have you actually built some houses in Stratford like that now?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can get that answer back to
Okay.
city staff.
And then my other one is, some people are concerned about the height of these. Have you actually built homes that high that people could drive by and take a look at them and see what they look like?
Through you, Mayor, I'm sure that there is probably a number of examples throughout the city of Stratford, not just with this builder, where you have walkouts where the buildings appear taller at the back than they are at the front. Again, we'd be happy to kind of point out some of those examples so that
Perfect.
staff as well as members of the public can have a look.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Seven?
Yeah, I didn't see any mention of the parking ratio being met. I just wondered if you or city staff could comment on if, I don't see any request for a change to that, so I'm just assuming that that requirement's met.
Through you, Mayor, we're not seeking any changes or variances to the parking regulations right now. We'll provide the minimum standard under the bylaw.
Thank you.
Any other member of council? All right. Thanks very much, Ms. Barrisdale. We have questions from council. I'd ask you not to go too far. I'll invite forward members of the public who might have questions, presentations, or comments. I just ask that you come forward to the microphone so we can all hear you. Mr. Wood, you'd like to come please forward? Yeah, you can just stay off to the side. Be great.
Thank you, Your Worship. My name's Ken Wood, and I'm a new resident as of October 30th at 230 Britannia. And I'm hitting myself in the head because I should have noticed this development earlier so I could get comments in early enough. But what I want to say is a couple of things. I'm going to make my pitch, as I always do, that we really need affordable rental housing in this city. And if there's any way to encourage the developer to create something, even if it increases the height so that you get the density that you need, I think that should be something that should be on every councillor's mind. One of the things that I want to say too is I'm very grateful for the city for building 230 Britannia. I moved in. It's got a few design flaws, but it's a well-done project, and I'm really looking forward to the next phase. My particular apartment faces Briar Hill, and I've read the comments from people that live on Briar Hill in the neighborhood, and I can absolutely agree with pretty much every one of them. When I look out my window, I see people using that pathway with an amazing frequency. It seems to be used by all kinds of dog walkers. It seems to be like an active living conduit for people going back and forth. And I know at this point we're probably talking about tweaking the development rather than saying no or something like that, because we do need the housing. But I think that perhaps one of the things that could be looked at is on that west side against the fence, there's some very mature trees there. That seems to be the pathway that everybody's got, and it goes along the backyards of all the people that are living on Briar Hill. If there was some way to make that an independent pathway, kind of a parkway pathway, maybe that would be your bike lane, it would be that kind of pedestrian access that might guarantee something. One of the questions I have, and I'm not up on where stormwater ponds need to be, but possibly that could be moved in order to provide kind of that throughway to the rotary. Because right now, it kind of looks to me, and I'm pretty sure most people agree, it looks like we're trying to cram in an awful lot of tiny little huts in that area. And with really short yards, and the parking and the garages and the need for people to have garages is an issue too. And maybe we could start thinking outside the box and do something like have a community parking area for people that live in that particular development. I know that that's something new, and I know that there's city bylaws that say you have to have so many parking spaces for so many residents. But there's got to be a way to start thinking about the future and finding a way to get people to pool their cars. We're talking driverless cars in the future, all kinds of things. Not everybody needs a two-car garage or a garage, period. And I think that that's something that developers should be encouraged to look at, to see if there's creative ways that they can actually do something about the parking requirements in the garages. I do think that the green space is really, really important. There seems to be a pride amongst people in that area. I've seen it, and I've talked to a few people just walking around or going around on my scooter, and everybody likes things the way they are. Change is always difficult, and I know it's going to have to change, but there's lots of tweaks that you can do in this plan, which is that conduit that I'm talking about, and maybe the stormwater management system can be somewhere else that becomes part of a park or something like that. But right now the density looks very crammed in, and maybe it's time to start going a little bit vertical or get an apartment block in there or something like that. Anyway, those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other members of the public having a comment? Please come forward.
Good evening. My name's Angela. I live at 54 Waddell. So I've got two questions. The first one, I think, is there was a fair amount of conversation that was referred to by both presenters about matching the character of the neighborhood. So my first question is, how many of the councilors and the planners and the subdivision developers have actually been on the property, have actually walked down Waddell, driven down Briar Hill, and taken a look at what's in that neighborhood?
I grew up at 58 Coriano Street.
Okay, so then all of the houses in that neighborhood are bungalows. If it's a really fancy house, it's a story and a half. So what that means to all of these people out here is that the proposed development, I can't sit in my dining room and have supper without the entire block behind me watching me. So I either choose to put curtains on every window in my house, or I move, if this proposal goes through the way it stands. I don't object to the infill. We need housing. I don't have any objections to that. But the idea that my home now turns into my fishbowl is not acceptable to me. So this proposal leaves me with those two choices.
Thank you. Ms. Barsdale, do you have any response to that, or are you just going to note that the height massing is an issue for some neighbors?
Yes.
Thank you. Another member of the public? Yes, please, come forward.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and Representative. My name is Bonnie Lindsay, and I reside at 29 Briar Hill Drive. This may be redundant, I'm not sure. I would like to correct the house numbers to include on our objection sheet, Jaron Ite, 93 Briar Hill, David and Claudia Stott, 99 Briar Hill, and Bill Haggerty, 250 Britannia Street. These residents signed the signature page, which was emailed to Ms. Bozzi by your required date of October 28, 2019. Am I correct in assuming the submitted signature sheet will entitle us as a group to appeal the decision of the City of Stratford to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal? I would also request the walkway leading to Coriano and subsequently to Glastonbury be an egress for this massive subdivision, as I foresee problems with congestion within and onto Britannia, because as a walker, I already experience long waits and dangerous conditions at the intersection of Britannia and Briar Hill Streets. Approximately 4 to 5 years ago, the city installed a drainage tile to help with annual flooding of my neighbors and my backyard. I would ask that this tile remain in place to mitigate this problem. Also, earlier this year, I spoke to 2 men while they were removing the barbed wire from atop the existing fence. When I asked why they were taking this action, they replied the new owner was removing or would be removing this fence and replacing it with a 4-foot chain link fence. I would request a tall, solid board fence would be more appropriate. I won't close yet because I'm really concerned about these townhouses behind our houses on Briar Hill. I'm not sure how you think that this is copying what's already there. It is not at all. In closing, I would like to reiterate, we as a group strongly object to this plan submitted by Werner Bromberg Homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Another member of the public wishing to offer comments at this time? Yes, Sarah, please come forward.
Hi, I'm Sarah Leafley, and I live on 36 Waddell Street, and I've been there for about 14 years. I just wanted to know, it's kind of a purely kind of selfish question for the few of us that have conifers and trees at the back of our lot. I want to know whether those trees are going to be coming down or not. Because if not, then like I agree with the other lady from Waddell that really your house is a fishbowl if they're coming down, because you can see right into, they'd be able to see right into the backyard. And we have about an 8-foot conifer hedge at the back, but we also have some fir trees at the back. So I don't know if the existing trees are coming down, or just would like to know that.
Ms. Barsdale. Thanks, Sarah.
Through you, Mayor, we did a tree inventory assessment for the trees on the property, as well as trees that are not on this property but are around the perimeter of the site. It's my understanding, and again, I'm speaking, putting my quasi-engineering hat on, that's not my profession, but I understand that there are some drainage and pooling issues that are happening around the perimeter of the site. That's been brought to our attention by both the city as well as residents in the neighborhood. There is some grading that has to happen in order to improve that situation. The intent is try to retain as many trees as possible. If they're on your property, it's likely that they will remain. I can't say for certain that they will all remain because, again, of this very fine dance that has to happen, making sure that we're not exasperating the problem that exists and hopefully improving the problem that's out there right now.
Thank you. Yes.
I just have one very quick question.
You got to come back to the microphone because people sitting at home, can't hear you, so. And you might have a neighbor there that wants to know what you think.
So my one quick question is this. When you regrade that land, what requirements do you have to meet about how you affect my backyard?
I'll let Mr. Delovic, our Director of Infrastructure, answer because they're the ones that approve it.
Certainly.
Yeah, through your worship, as part of any master grading plan, we look at that it causes no problems with existing neighbors. In a lot of cases, if we know of existing problems, we want to fix them up where there's poor drainage and fix that up. So they're not allowed to drain water onto your property. They have to capture it before it gets there.
Okay, but if my property, like I said, I live at 54 Waddell, so my backyard comes down, then there's the conifers, then there's a gully that builds up into a gravel path that's been, I think the Egg Society actually graveled it for a fair, and then it gullies on the other side. So when that gets leveled, are you required to make sure that the water, like, that I'm not the low spot in town?
Through your worship, yes, that would be a requirement that, as I said, they can't drain water onto your property. If your lands were draining onto the fairgrounds, that has to continue to happen. They'll have to capture that, and through either swales or backyard catch basins, they'll have to account for that stormwater. And that'll be part of the detailed design process that the engineering staff will review. They will look at, they will have plans showing existing conditions and then what they're proposing as part of the stormwater management for the site.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just, sorry, through you, Mayor. Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
Nope, excuse me. You're right.
May I just add to that?
Yeah, sure, come on up. Ms. Barrisdale, if you want to finish your.
Sure. Through you, Mayor, the other additional consideration, I think, any grading that happens off-site or any tree removals that impact a tree that's not on our property, it is a standard requirement that permissions are sought from that property owner. So if there is minimal grading that has to happen, feathering out or transition grading that has to happen, or if there's a root of a tree that's coming onto this property, there's an overhang, we would have to seek permission, the owner would have to seek permission from each property, surrounding property owner, to be able to do that.
Sir.
Ed Adlowski, 23 Briar Hill Drive. What a lot of us are concerned with is the shortest way I can put this, our backyards, the way they face out toward the fairground now, or that, is the wall effect of a string of like semi-detached or whatever the design of the buildings is just too much for that area. If they were broken into like single-family homes with spaces in between, or or that's similar to the nature of surrounding subdivision, as opposed to try to stick in as many units as you can on such a small piece of land in the form of a string of buildings, giving us a wall, And also one other point is too, are there any restrictions in terms of how much people are allowed to have in terms of sunlight on their property? Are restrictions from other buildings?
Here he is.
Through your worship, given the height that they've proposed, we didn't require a shadowing study be completed as part of a complete application, if that clarifies.
I just wondered, because this is really, you're talking, this wall effect can be quite strong when we're talking about like long rectangular buildings along the back of Briar Hill Drive, you know, and that's what you're proposing in that area. If you're going to do anything like that, I'd say stick those buildings in the middle of the property, have single-family units along instead, you know what I mean?
So single family,
Considerations we should make, that's all.
single
Thank you.
family backing onto single family and townhomes in the middle? Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to offer comment?
Hi, my name is John. Good to meet everybody here. I think we're all here for the same reason, because we're concerned about our properties. You come in here and you ask for a lot of changes. You want the backyard to be smaller, you want the front yard to be smaller, you want the side yard to be smaller, and you want the height to be larger, so that you can squeeze in more stuff where we've already complied with all the zoning that we've had in our area, and we've lived with what we have. We haven't asked for zoning changes to do anything with our present houses. So my question is are we going to allow all these changes for these people to build properties behind our properties? We pay our taxes, and we do whatever we have to do to keep our zoning. So I just don't agree with all these changes in zoning so that they can put more in. I think we need to look at this and say, can they really make everything smaller or bigger and put it in our properties? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. Anyone else wishing to make a comment at this time? Sure, please come forward, sir. Yep, that's great. Hey, Bob.
Hi, I apologize I arrived late and missed the beginning of the presentation, but just quickly, two concerns. I live on Windermere, Bob, and I left my name with Raquel. I thought that we had an opportunity for the community to comment after tonight. Am I wrong on that? Because now I see I did manage to retrieve the letter, which I didn't have earlier, that the cutoff was October 28th. Is there any opportunity past today's date?
So what'll, Ms. Tucker, do you want, or Ms. Bossy, sir?
Okay. Through your worship, staff are still accepting comments. The date outlined in the notice was to have your comments included in the public meeting report, so we would be happy to accept your comments after today.
Terrific, because just briefly here, and I just wanted to announce tonight, speaking with two neighbors, unfortunately, who missed the letter, the original letter, we had a misunderstanding that the original building that's currently there was part of the official plan and that there wasn't going to be further changes. And to John's comment, we thought it was going to stay consistent, and the lady earlier, that it was going to stay consistent. And I understand now that was a misunderstanding, that that was a concept plan that was presented, I guess, almost 2 years ago now, and before the approval for the current building that just was constructed. And my concern is, and for the other neighbors who couldn't make it tonight, was that our objections, and I'm sorry, I do object, and to the comments to the neighbors that live there. I realize it's sort of a not in my backyard kind of scenario, but we don't. If you live there, and our neighbors live there for 40 years, part of the appeal was that this is a quiet neighborhood. We certainly understand there's going to be development and changes, but I think the key to draw to is the other comments made. We were expecting something consistent, that it wasn't going to become a maximum density area plunked in the middle of, would have been a tradition. I apologize for saying traditional, but the concern too is that the maybe non-quantifiable issues of when you go out for a walk and the neighborhood's quiet, there is going to be a lot more traffic. And I understand also, just to say, it may meet the technical requirements, but we're concerned that the practical effect and things like traffic, already for folks that live in the neighborhood, with McCarthy and the rec center, there's a lot of traffic that try to find alternate routes to zip through when they're late for a hockey game or stuff. And it's human nature. If we introduce more and more volume, even though it may meet the technical specifications, we're quite concerned that from a practical living standpoint, this is going to have a dramatic change to the neighborhood. And My other concern, and I was going to register, was just in terms of infrastructure. I understand there's going to be developments and upgrades, but if you suddenly went to a high capacity, maximum density, the load, I'm not an engineer, and I know this is going to be reviewed by the engineers, but if you suddenly put that load in with new builds in the middle of an old neighborhood, sort of the domino effect down the road, what's going to happen to basically like sewer capacity and stuff? The capacity may be there, but we're talking infrastructure that, as you well know, is already deteriorating and struggling to keep up with repairs. Would it not make sense to have the upgrades made before a massive change like this gets introduced of trying to go to maximum density to meet the specifications? And that's a concern that I have that I want to share. But thank you. If there's an opportunity afterwards, there are some neighbors that I think are going to be concerned about the changes.
So I'll explain the process. So by October 28th, you had to have your written comments in if you wanted it put in this report that was
Fair enough,
circulated.
I understand.
So tonight, there'll be minutes of tonight's meeting that will go to all of Committee of Planning. And that is a public process where members of the public can come and again, ask the clerk to speak and register concerns. Council will consider the application. Notwithstanding the applicants here, often applicants will ask for things that maybe are a little bit broad brush and then work down from there. So there is a process that undertake over the next number of weeks and months. Will they look at this? Comments from the neighborhood with regards to massing, equal massing, so singles versus singles, towns, and all that type of stuff is taken into consideration. Staff look at infrastructure. Development charges, which we charge for those lots, are then looked at to say, okay, what development charges are we bringing in, and does it meet needs for infrastructure improvements in the area and all those other things? If they're specific just to that development, then the developer is expected to pay those. And they pay them up front and bear that whole cost themselves. And that will be reviewed by our staff. They'll put in expert reports. Our staff will look at it and either agree or disagree and then basically go back from there. So this is an iterative process, which tonight is just the first stage of saying this is what we'd like to do. And I can tell you that you probably have about 3 more or 4 more months of enjoyable time coming to see us.
May I make one other request? That I was advised that had folks not replied, that there may not be other notices sent out. Is it possible to make a request that a reminder notice go out, that we just want to draw attention to some of the neighbors that, in fact, they really need to pay attention to these letters if they have concerns and what the scale of the proposed change is? Is it possible to have another reminder notice sent out?
So 2 things happen. Everyone has the opportunity tonight to sign the paper adjacent to Councillor Gaffney behind, which will get them automatic personal notification.
Okay.
Then if we actually reach a decision, there is a notice go out to all the neighborhoods in the affected area, or the neighbors in the affected area, to tell them that we're considering a final approval.
Thank you.
All right.
And the clerk will need your name.
Any, go ahead, Bob.
I just said he should tell her his name.
That's Bob. And last name Phil Sheehy.
Any other member of the public at this time wishing to offer comment? Any other member of the public? Come on back up, Ken.
The 2 things that I want to add is that we have a lot of people that are now living at 230 Britannia, and I don't think they're aware of this at all. So I'm hoping somehow they can get on it. I will inform my neighbors in that building. The second thing that came to mind is it seems like a lot of the concern of residents on Briar Hill and other areas is kind of sight lines and having some privacy and stuff. And I'm wondering if the city and the developer could look at something innovative, like I'll call it green fencing. I've seen things that, and Netherlands usually sponsors all of these things, where they're able to make these kind of, imagine a chain link fence that's already got wonderful grown ivy on it that improves the environment and the air and that kind of thing. There might be ways to put fences up. And speaking as somebody at 230, I think that 230 should have a fence-off area as well. So
Yep.
I'm hoping that that could be worked in. Thank you.
Ms. Bossy just wrote that down. Thanks, Ken. All right. Anyone else wishing to make a comment at this time? All right. Ms. Barsdale, do you have anything further you'd like to add to this?
No, thank you.
All right. So City Council intends to consider this application at a future Planning and Heritage Committee meeting where members of council will have an opportunity for full discussion of the application after reviewing the comments received from the public at this time. If you would like to receive further notice of this application, please leave your name and address on the form on the table immediately adjacent to Councillor Gaffney. And actually, I think I'd ask city staff to take that out into the rotunda, and you can sign it out there so that you can head on. And at this point in time, this meeting is adjourned, and I thank you all for coming. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Rachel.
Along this stretch, move everything over, lose a couple lots over here, move the whole Maltese path, as opposed to having.
I'd like to know how they're gonna decide which side the sidewalk's gonna go on. 'Cause look, if you go up this way, I mean, that makes sense going to the Ag Valley. That means this one doesn't have any sidewalk where they go up this way. I don't know how the heck they decide on that.
Imagine it's gonna be full.
Huh?
Getting through, over to the rotary. This one? There and up there. Right. Coming up through here.
On either side?
Right.
All right, I'll ask council
Yeah.
to reconvene at this time, and I'll turn it back over to the clerk,
That's gonna be a road to the.
and we'll move to item 7, orders of the day.
So through your worship, item 7.1 is correspondence regarding a call for candidates for the board of the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, and interested candidates must submit an application by Friday, November 15th.
Thank you.
Item 7.2 is correspondence from Enbridge Gas, Inc., which has applied to the Ontario Energy Board for approval to raise its natural gas rates effective January 1st, 2020, based on a rate-setting framework and other adjustments previously approved. And the full application regarding the public hearing is available for viewing in the clerk's office.
Thank you.
Item 7.3 is an acceptance of proposal, and there is a staff.
Councillor Henderson?
Sorry, I just had a question on 7.2. It says on there that comments have to be in by November 11th. Were they late sending this out? Like, how can people comment when it says comments have to be received by November 11th?
Through you, your worship, I cannot comment on if it was sent out in delay.
Okay.
Yep. Thank
Just
you.
seems bizarre.
Moving
Okay.
on to item 7.3, which is an acceptance of proposal. There is a staff recommendation that Millard's Chartered Professional Accountants be appointed auditors for the city for 2019 to 2021, with an option for 2022 and 2023, and that the manager of financial services be authorized to exercise this option as deemed necessary.
Councillor Gaffney, Councillor Clifford, discussion? Councillor Verbeck?
Just had a quick question. In the submission summary, we don't actually get any of the bids. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
That's the way we've done it here at the city. We don't disclose prices. It's just a list of the companies that submitted. Price is only one factor when it comes to evaluating these proposals. So.
Thank you.
I do believe if you'd have any further discussion, though, that they can dig deeper with you at the finance
Absolutely.
office. All right. If not, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Item 7.4 is a tender, and there is a staff recommendation that the Community Services Department be authorized to extend for a one-year term the contract for storage of plant material and hanging basket preparation, and that staff retender the remaining bedding plant requirements for a one-year term.
Councillor Beatty and Councillor Henderson, discussion? If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
And turning to your addenda, item 7.5 is a noise bylaw exemption for Wellington Street at St. David Street. And there is a staff recommendation that an exemption from noise control bylaw 113-79 be granted to Whiteman on November 16th from 11 p.m. to November 17th till 12 p.m.
Councillor Bunting and Councillor Vasilakos, discussion? Councillor Vasilakos?
We've granted a couple of these exemptions in the past. Have we had a lot of complaints from them?
Through your worship, no, we have not. As noted, we had one in another area, it was right adjacent to a residential area, and there were no complaints that we received.
Anything further? If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Turning to your agenda, item 8 is business for which previous notice has been given and there was none scheduled. So moving on to section 9, reports of the standing committees, and there are no standing committee reports to be considered this evening. Moving to item 10, notice of intent. Item 10.1 is a notice of a public meeting. And Stratford City Council will hold a public meeting on Monday, December 9th at 7 p.m. in the council chambers to hear all interested persons with respect to the zone change application Z10-19 under Section 34 of the Planning Act. The application affects the property with the municipal address of 3194 Vivian Line 37. The purpose of this zone change is to rezone the property from a future residential zone to a residential fifth density special zone. And the applicant is proposing to demolish the existing single detached dwelling and construct 2 apartment buildings containing 28 dwelling units.
That's for the information.
Moving on to item 11, reading of the bylaws. There are 11 bylaws plus an addenda bylaw listed for consideration as follows. So bylaws 11.1 to 11.5 authorize the conveyance of parts of land to the respective property owners listed. Item 11.6 is an appointment to the Energy and Environment Committee. Item 11.7 is to appoint auditors. Item 11.8 is an appointment to the Huron-Perth Health Unit Board. Item 11.9 is to amend the fees and charges bylaw. Item 11.10 is with regards to council remuneration. And item 11.13 is to revise appointments to enforce the snow and ice removal bylaw. And these bylaws could be taken collectively upon unanimous vote of council present.
Councillor Henderson moving and seconded.
I was going to ask if...
It's okay, Councillor Clifford. We'll pull it out after, okay? Seconded by somebody wishing to do it collectively, Councillor Burback. You would like which one removed?
The council remuneration.
Thank you, 1110. Any others wishing to have any removed? Councillor Henderson?
Can I ask a question about 11.13?
Well, why don't you do that after we move them, and they're on the floor for discussion.
All right, sure.
All right, so bylaws 11.1 through 9 and 11.13 have been moved and seconded to be taken collectively upon unanimous approval. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. So we'll go to first and second reading of bylaws 11.1 through 9 and 11.13. A mover, Councillor Ingram and Councillor Bunting. Discussion, Councillor Henderson.
Yes, on 11.13, so it's got a list of everybody that's just the city employees that are bylaw officers, right? Because we have lots of other bylaw officers that do parking lots around the city, right?
Mr. Dolovic,
Your worship, yes, those are existing city employees.
Perfect, thank you.
anything further? If not, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Third and final reading, Councillor Clifford and Councillor Gaffney for bylaws 11.1 through 9 and 11.13. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Bylaw 11.10 for first and second reading, moved by Councillor Henderson, seconded by Councillor Beatty. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Third and final reading, Councillor Gaffney and Councillor Vasilakos. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you.
Moving on to item 12, the consent agenda. Are there any items listed on the consent agenda to be considered by council?
Councillor Seven.
I'd like to endorse the resolution from Niagara. It's number 160 regarding the cuts to legal aid.
Thank you. Send that to Ms. Defoe. Where would you like to do with that?
Number was it?
So it'll be referred to staff. Is that all right? Thank you. Seconder for that, Councillor Burback.
Which number was it, sorry?
160.
Legal aid cuts.
160.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
All right. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Anything else on the consent agenda? If not, we'll go to new business. A motion to adjourn to standing committees for a 5-minute recess first. Councillor Ingram and Councillor Gaffney. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you.
Seeing none, item number 3 is subcommittee minutes. They're there for your perusal. We do not have any delegations, so moving on to report of the fire chief. Item 5.1 is the annual Christmas market bylaw exemption for a fire, and this item is also relisted for tonight. So, Chief?
Through the chair, the annual Christmas Market Committee is seeking approval to have an open burn outside of the typical hours of 4 to 11. They're looking for 10:30 to 4:30. My fire prevention staff have been working with them diligently to make sure everything's appropriate and safe for anybody that'd be visiting the Christmas market during that time. And the report is in front of you if you have any questions.
Are there any questions? Councilor Ingram?
I don't have a question. I'll move the subcommittee recommendation.
Okay, seconder?
I'll second it.
Councilor Burbach. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Second item for the fire chief is the Town of Goderich Fire Dispatching Services, if you want to quickly go over what that is.
Okay, through the chair, we've been doing standby dispatching for Goderich since around 2009, over the last decade. They've now expressed interest for the Stratford Fire Department to take on their dispatching full-time. It will provide more revenue to the budget. And we've been working through the transition and what that would look like. And are there any questions?
Any questions? Councilor Gaffney?
I'll move the subcommittee recommendation, Madam Chair.
Yeah, seconded by Councilor Henderson. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any, and that'll be listed in reconvene tonight as well. Next, we have report of the chief building official, 6.1 being 100 St. Patrick Street, the Justice Building lease renewal. Mr. Dlovich?
Yeah, through the chair, this is the lease to the province for the courts. It's 5 years. Not a lot of room for negotiation, but we did check with local realtors, and they did confirm that the rates that are being offered by the province have agreed to is keeping in line with what the market is in downtown Stratford for rentals.
So do we have any questions or a motion? Councillor Clifford?
I have a question. If there was any changes at the police station, if it wasn't at that facility, would that affect the space that we have right now?
Through the chair, I don't know that answer. I'd have to look at the lease, if there was anything in there if the police were to leave, but this is for the court space that they're leasing.
Our last discussion with them is that if we were to look at a new building, they would look at moving the lease with it.
Okay. Any other questions?
I'll
Councillor
move the
Gaffney?
staff recommendation, or the subcommittee recommendation, Madam Chair.
Councillor Seven seconded. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. And then we have, next is report of the Energy and Environment Committee. We have a request for resolution in support of the conservation authorities, and there is a resolution there for your consideration. Councilor Burbach?
I'll move that.
You move the subcommittee recommendation, seconded by Councilor Henderson. Any discussion? Councilor Clifford?
Yeah, I don't support the motion on the floor. I think a review is healthy. When I was at AMO, the people were talking about there'd be one conservation authority would have one rule, one would have another rule. And the other thing, that there are conservation authorities that have swimming pools like that. So I think a review is healthy. So I don't support the motion on the floor. Core services I do support, but I think a review on the other is a healthy exercise.
Councilor Burbach?
I'd just like to point out that in this resolution, it asks for clarity between things that would be required and things that would not be. So that is one of the things asked for in this motion.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Next, we also have updated terms of reference for the Energy Environment Advisory Committee, and those changes are shown in the management report. Do we have any questions? Councilor Ingram?
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay. Seconder for that, Councilor Burbach. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. And then we have the report of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and there's a request for additional accessible on-street parking spaces, and there is a subcommittee recommendation there. Councillor Henderson?
Yes, and I just want to change it just slightly, because after our meeting, we went out and we looked at the south side, and there's a telephone pole there. So we would like to have it say at the south/north side, so that they can look on either side of that driveway. Because the north side actually looks more accessible.
So it would be just up to staff to decide which would be the better spot?
Yes, just for them to guess the possibility of adding an on-street accessible parking spot on Erie Street at the south or north side of the entrance to the City Hall Annex.
Okay. Councillor Gaffney?
I don't know if I'm seconding what she just said or if I'm making, okay, I'll second that.
You'll
Madam
second
Chair.
that? Okay, do we have any questions on that? Seeing none, all in favor, opposed if any, and that's carried. And then the rest of it is for the information of committee. And that's it. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Burbach and Councillor Bunting, all in favor? And that's carried. Thank you so much, everyone.
Oh, this is why Cole was here. I was wondering why he was here.
And I will call the Planning and Heritage Subcommittee meeting to order, or I'm sorry, committee meeting to order. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing none, item number 3 is subcommittee meeting minutes for you. There are no delegations scheduled, so item 5 is the private tree bylaw. I don't believe there is a presentation for us tonight, but staff is on hand to answer any questions, should committee have any questions. Councillor Clifford?
I'll move the staff that subcommittee's recommendation.
And Councillor Stebbins seconding. Seeing no questions or comments, all in favor? And that's unanimous, thank you.
Oh,
Councillor Henderson?
do they have an approximate time when they'll be coming back with the report?
Mr. Mallett?
Okay,
Sometime next year.
okay.
Item number 6 is the report of the Manager of Development Services, and 6.1 is the possible revisions to the City of Stratford sign bylaw, number 159-2004. Again, there is no staff presentation tonight, but staff are here to answer any questions, should members of the committee have any questions. Councillor Vasilakos?
I'll move the subcommittee recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Burbach? Seeing no questions or comments, Councillor Vasilakos.
I had one quick question. Just subsequent to the subcommittee, I have had 2 emails from members of the public interested in the banning of election lawn signs because of the plastic issue. So I know that it was talked about during subcommittee, but that I've subsequently heard from members of the public. They're at least interested in having that included in the public consultation.
Thank you, and I do believe staff had noted that from our subcommittee meeting, and we're going to report back on that as well. So we have a motion on the floor. It has been seconded. Any other questions or comments from committee? All in favor? Thank you, that's unanimous. Item 7 is the project update for the information of committee, and I'll take a motion for adjournment. Councillor Clifford and Councillor Vasilakos. All in favor? Thank you.
It's a new record.
Call to order the Finance and Labor Relations Committee. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest in general nature thereof? Unnoted. Item 3 is subcommittee minutes, and we don't have any delegation. Item 5 is 5.1, the Board Remuneration for Festival Hydro Inc. and Festival Hydro Services Inc. And we have subcommittee's recommendation on 5, and that's moved by Councillor Gaffney, seconded by, sorry.
We're really not making a subcommittee recommendation because subcommittee did not make a recommendation.
Oh, okay, let me read it. I wasn't here, I'm
We
sorry.
as committee are making a recommendation based on the staff recommendations after the word "and."
Okay, I'll ask the acting CEO.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chair, so this report on board remuneration for Festival Hydro Inc. and Festival Hydro Services Inc. was presented to subcommittee, and they have referred it to committee this evening without a recommendation. So perhaps, if it's okay with you, I'll just do an overview of the report and what the board is recommending. The city received the recommendation from Festival Hydro to revise the Board of Director remuneration for both Hydro Inc. and Services Inc. Just as a reminder, Council determines through the declaration of sole shareholder for both of those companies what the compensation of the boards will be. The board for Festival Hydro retained a consulting group last year to do a review, and they had a number of findings. And in your packages this evening, you have their findings, their report, and the recommendation and the letter that came from the board. So they are recommending that the remuneration for Hydro Inc. and Hydro Services Inc. both be increased. It has been some time since both of those have been reviewed. In addition to the background information you have from the board, the city has also prepared 2 spreadsheets to list for Festival Hydro and Festival Hydro Services Inc. what the current board remuneration is. There is an annual retainer as well as per meeting per diem there. And in comparison is what the recommended increase would be. So for Festival Hydro Inc., there are annual retainers that range anywhere from $3,000 for a city councillor who is a director up to the chair. And you'll see that there is a recommendation to increase those amounts. The per diems would stay the same as $60 per meeting if it's less than 3 hours, and $90 if it's more than 3 hours, and that reflects the per diem in your council remuneration bylaw as well. With respect to Festival Hydro Services Inc., again, this one is a little different in that only the chair is receiving an annual retainer. The other directors were not receiving a retainer, but they were receiving a per diem depending on the length of the meeting. So again, there is the comparison of the current rate and the recommendation from the board with respect to the increase in those. I will say that for the Festival Hydro Inc., the last time this was reviewed, I believe, was in 2014. And with respect to Festival Hydro Services Inc., the last review was in 2005. There are a number of recommendations that were contained in the report. In our analysis, we are identifying the work that was undertaken through the consultant, and we've also provided some guiding principles with respect to, for your consideration when dealing with the recommendation. So the staff recommendation that was presented and then forwarded was to give consideration to that, and if you are approving any type of a change, it will require amendments to the declaration of sole shareholder. And we're recommending that if you are making any changes, those become effective Jan 1, 2020. And we'll note that there is no impact on the city tax base as the compensation is recovered through the hydro rates charged by Festival Hydro.
Councillor Ingram.
Thank you. I had 2 questions, and you've just answered one of them, so thank you for that. My second question is, because all of us do not sit on either one of these boards, and there is a financial compensation, is it a conflict for the current members of council that sit on these boards to be voting on this?
So I will repeat the message we have given to council before. We cannot advise whether or not you have a pecuniary interest or a conflict of interest you will need to determine that, and we do have our integrity commissioner who can give that advice to you. I will say that you have just recently dealt with changes to your council remuneration and voted on the changes there and the bylaw. So if you would like to consult with the integrity commissioner, you are able to do, and perhaps a motion to refer or defer this matter until members of council who feel it's necessary to consult have had the opportunity to do so if they have not already.
Mr. Matheson.
I'll declare an interest in item 5 I trust the judgment of council, and as a board member of those corporations, I'm happy to step back.
Councillor Ingram.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, I think the difference between the council remuneration is that it applied equally across the board, whereas this one does not.
Okay, Councillor Bunting.
Yeah, I'd just like to speak to the proposed increases. First of all, the subject matter experts that sit on the board, there's no question in my mind that they deserve, in order to attract and retain such experts, it's important. And I would fully agree with that. I do have some trouble with the increase for the city councillors. Therefore, I will, and also, as Mayor Matheson, I too would have to declare a
Pecuniary interest.
pecuniary interest.
Okay, do note it. Councillor Baslasko.
I'm going to say, so I would agree that subject matter experts and getting people who are experts in the field to sit on these boards, I think it is probably a really good idea to move to something that's closer to what the market and Low Barnes actually identified. I too think that city council members sit on a lot of boards. Some of them are fluffy, some of them are not. Festival Hydro is clearly not fluffy, but either are some of the other boards that are actually sort of high level. I would think the health unit and things like that. So I would be in favor of the increases that are to the non-city council members, but given that city council members, we just received an increase for the duties that we have, plus that we have a standard per diem for our meetings anyways, I would not. So maybe if I could make a motion, I'll make a motion that the chair, vice chair, and the non-city council directors I'll move the proposed new retainer, but I would leave out the city council members.
Okay. Motion, do we have a seconder? Councillor Seven seconds it. Any other questions or comments on the motion on the floor?
I'll just make.
Sorry?
Yeah. I think the only comment I'll make simply is that we heard how long it's been since the last review of this. And we're not just making decisions for this current council, but we're making decisions that's going to, as we go forward here. So again, it's the same thing that we had on council remuneration. How long do you wish to not give board members increases? And so that's the only point I'll just make.
Councillor Henderson.
So I'm just wondering if there isn't, instead of like going from 3,000 to 6,000, maybe just a CPI increase, so at least there's something there. Maybe they could add that instead for the members. Because, okay, I just want to get this clear, because right now they get $60 if it's a 2-hour meeting and $90 if it's a 3-hour meeting. Plus this 3,000?
I believe that's correct, but I'll let our acting CEO respond to that.
Yes, so with respect to Festival Hydro, the chair, the vice chair, the directors who are non-councillors and the directors who are councillors are receiving an annual retainer. And then in addition to that, they do receive, call it a per diem, depending on how long the meeting is.
Right.
So each of those would receive that. For Festival Hydro Services, Inc., it is different. The chair is receiving an annual retainer, and then the directors, whether or not they're non-council members or city council members, they are receiving the per diem, but no retainer. And the recommendation is to go to increases for the retainers, as printed in your handout.
Okay, Councillor Henderson.
Well, I'll probably vote against this because I think they should get a percentage of increase, like whether, even if it's CPI for the retainer part. Because if everybody else is getting a raise and they're not, that's not fair. Especially the one that hasn't been reviewed since what, 2009? The other one was 2014 or something? 2005?
Over 14 years.
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah, any other question, Councillor Henderson? Is that it? Councillor Seven?
I just had a couple things. Can we just have an explanation of the purpose of a retainer for a member of council? I'm just confused because my understanding of retainer is that they would, I just don't know. If you could explain the purpose of the retainer in general, maybe?
Joan, do you understand the question?
I'm trying to recall from almost 20 years ago when the two boards were set up. I will say that the remuneration was set out in the shareholder declaration that was voted upon by council at that time. I don't have a lot of background information on the rationale for the retainer and for the per diem. I can go back and do some more research if you would like.
Thank you. And the other piece is just, I know this doesn't directly affect the tax base. I do agree with the motion on the floor. But is it fair to say that the more money Festival Hydro spends, the less money the city would receive?
I'll ask the Director of Corporate Services what he thinks of that question and answer for it.
Through the chair, I think the more direct comparison is that this is charged to hydro customers. However, residual revenue can be retained by hydro for some projects, and they do declare a dividend to us. So there is a possibility that this could translate back to the dividend that we receive. But it's a more direct impact to the customers of Festival Hydro.
Okay, thank you.
We have a motion on the floor. Any other questions or comments on the motion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just for clarification, I understand that the motion is for both, is it Festival Hydro and Services, Inc.?
I believe it is, but I'll ask the mover what.
Yeah, so the recommendations for the non-council members and then the council members remaining the same as they are currently.
And just a further
Yes.
question. There was a portion in the staff recommendation that talked about CPI, an annual CPI, and I'm just wondering if council, if that is included in the motion or not, just so that we are clear.
I'll ask the mover and seconder.
I had not included that in.
You have not included- I think that's-
Simply because it's quite a large jump.
I think that's what Councillor Henderson was referring to. Is that
Yes, I
correct?
was referring that if we're not passing the one, we should do the CPI.
Yeah, well, it's not in the motion, so you understand that. Any other questions or comments on the motion? Call the question. All in favor? No, sorry, you're not. 1, 2, 3. Opposed, if any? That's passed. Item 6.1, the 2020 insurance renewal and subcommittee's recommendation report regarding the City of Stratford's 2020 insurance renewal for the period December 31st, 2019 to December 31st, 2020. We received for information. Mover, seconder, moved by Councillor Seven, seconded by Councillor Burbach. Any questions or comments?
This is 6.1, right?
Correct.
I was just trying to remember the last time we put a request for proposal out for an insurance provider. I think it was just in the last couple of years, wasn't it?
That's correct.
So we usually do it about every 5 or 7 years or something? Is there a timeline that we do it again?
Through the chair, I review them after 3 years.
Okay.
And we determine at that point if it's appropriate.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on 6.1? All in favor? That's unanimous. Report of the Festival Hydro. 7.1 is the financial statement and commentary for Festival Hydro, Inc., second quarter ending June 30th. Then we have a subcommittee's recommendation. Moved by Councillor Ingram, seconded by Councillor Burbach. Questions, comments? All in favor? Thank you. Unanimous. 7.2 is the financial statement and commentary for Festival Hydro Services, Inc. in the same period of time. Moved by Councillor Gaffney, seconded by Councillor Bunting. Questions, comments? All in favor? It's unanimous. 8.1, internal borrowing, and the subcommittee's recommendation that the council approve internal borrowing from the reserve fund in the amount of $5,897,975 over a 10-year period at a rate of 3%. Moved by Councilor Bunting, second by Councilor Vasilevsky. Questions, comments? Councilor Stebbins.
I just had a question, how this will affect the budget for 2020.
Through the chair, the servicing of these costs has been included in the 2020 budget.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Call the question. All in favor? That's unanimous. 8.2, the operating budget variance report as of September 30th, and we have a subcommittee's recommendation. Moved by Councilor Ingram, second by Councilor Burbach. All in, have you got a question? I'm sorry.
I just had a quick question about, in Appendix 1, and it talks about council remuneration, and it says that we're full-time. I was just curious as to why we're called full-time and not part-time.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, that's just the categorization in our payroll system. You are considered full-time employees, and that hence the option to elect to take benefits.
Okay, just seems strange.
Any other questions?
Hey, where'd you see that?
Call all in favor? Thank you. 9.1, request for changes to the 2019 parking capital budget pay-by-plate installation, and we have a subcommittee's recommendation of 9.1. Moved by Councilor Vasilevsky and seconded by Councilor Ingram. Any questions or comments? Call the question. All in favor? Unanimous.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
All opposed?
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. 9.2, the draft 2020 meeting schedule. And we have a subcommittee's recommendation that the draft 2020 meeting schedule be approved. Moved by Councilor Burbach, seconded by Councilor Peedy. Questions, comments? All in favor? Thank you. A motion to adjourn. Councilor Gaffney, Councilor Vasilevsky, all in favor? Thank you.
Yeah, so this summer we're having 2 meetings in July and 2 in August.
Madam Clerk, the meeting will reconvene when you're ready.
Through your worship, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest made at standing committee and to be restated at the reconvene portion?
I declared one in the Finance and Labor Relations Committee meeting, item 5.1, as I'm a director of the corporation. Councilor Bunting?
Yes, likewise. Thank you. Same numbers.
Moving on to item 15.2, committee reports. Item 15.2.1 is the Infrastructure, Transportation, and Safety Committee, and there are 2 items listed for consideration. Item 5.1, which was the annual Christmas market bylaw exemption, and item 5.2, which was the Town of Goderich Fire Dispatching Services.
Moved by Councilor Stebbins, seconded by Councilor Vasilevsky. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried.
Moving on to item 15.3, which is reading of the bylaws. There are 2 bylaws to be considered. Bylaw 11.11 is the Goderich Fire Dispatching Agreement, and bylaw 11.12 is the confirmatory bylaw.
Moved by Councilor Henderson and seconded by Councilor Burbach that bylaws 11.13 and 11.12 be taken collectively. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. First and second reading of bylaw 11.11, 11.12. Councilor Ingram and Councilor Vasilevsky. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Third and final reading. Councilor Clifford and Councilor Gaffney. Moving third and final reading of bylaw 11.11 and 11.12. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Motion to adjourn this evening. Councilor Bunting and Councilor Burbach. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that's carried. Thank you.